StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories, where biblical stories of the ages come alive.
We continue now with our series of Bible stories from the Old Testament with another true story found in Genesis chapter 24, verse 1 through chapter 25, verse 18. And this one is titled, Journey to Find a Wife.
StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories with your host, Dr. Joe Jackson. Stories directly from God's holy word, told in easy-to-understand story form that the whole family will enjoy, and featuring the work of a talented artist illustrating each week's story. Now gather the family because it's time for this week's Bible story.
After the death of Sarah, Isaac, her son, was lonely. And as he was now old enough to marry, Abraham sought a wife for him. For at that time, the parents always chose the wives for their sons and husbands for their daughters. Abraham didn't wish Isaac to marry any woman of the people in the land where he was living, for they were all worshipers of idols, and they wouldn't teach their children the ways of the Lord. Abraham made his long journey to the land of Canaan, where he stayed for a time at a place called Haran in Mesopotamia, between the two rivers Tigris and Euphrates, far to the northeast of Canaan. When Abraham left Haran to go on to Canaan, his brother Nahor and his family stayed there in Haran. They worshiped the Lord just as Abraham and his family did. And Abraham thought that it would be well to find among them a wife for his son Isaac. Since Abraham couldn't leave his own land of Canaan and go to Haran to find a wife for his son Isaac, he called for his chief or eldest servant. This was a man Abraham trusted, a man who cared for all of his flocks and his cattle and who ruled over his other servants. So Abraham sent his chief servant to Haran to find a wife for his son Isaac. When Abraham's servant arrived at the walls of the city of Nahor, it was evening time, and this was the time when women would go out and draw water. He prayed to God, and he said, "Let it be that the young woman to whom I say, 'Please let down your pitcher that I may drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll give your camels a drink,' let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." And before he even finished praying, a beautiful young woman came to the well to draw water. As she drew the water and filled her jar, the servant ran to her and he said, "Please, let me drink a little water from your pitcher." And she said, "Drink, my lord." And she held her jar for him to drink. And then she said, "I'll draw water for your camels also, until they've finished drinking." And she emptied her jar into the trough by the well and drew more water until she had given drink to all the camels. And the servant of Abraham looked at her and wondered whether she might be the right woman for Isaac to marry. And he said to her, "Will you tell me whose daughter you are? And do you suppose that I could find a place to stay at your father's house?" He gave her a gold ring and 2 bracelets for her wrists. And the beautiful young woman, whose name was Rebekah, said, "My father is Bethuel, who's the son of Nahor. We have room for you and your camels, and they'll have a place to stay and food." And then the man bowed his head and thanked God, for he saw that his prayer was answered. And Rebekah ran home and told her family about the stranger and showed them the presents that he'd given to her. Rebekah's brother, Laban, went out to Abraham's servant and brought him into the house and took care of his men and his camels. And he provided water so that they could wash their feet, for that was the custom in that land where people didn't wear shoes but sandals instead. And food was offered. And when the food was set before Abraham's chief servant, he said, "I will not eat until I've told you why I'm here." And then he told them that he was the servant of Abraham, and he shared the whole story with them. The trusted servant told them about Abraham's riches and how Abraham had sent him to Haran to find a wife for Isaac, his son, and how he had met Rebekah and how he had prayed and God had answered his prayer. And then he asked that they would give him Rebekah to be taken home to be married to Isaac. When the servant finished telling the reason for his journey, Laban, Rebekah's brother, and Bethuel, her father, said, "This comes from the Lord. It is his will, and it's not for us to oppose it. Here's Rebekah, take her, and let her be the wife of your master's son, for the Lord has shown it to be his will." And then Abraham's servant gave rich presents to Rebekah and to her mother and to her brother Laban. And that night they had a feast with great joy. And the next morning the servant said, "Now I must go home to my master." But they said, "Oh, not so soon. Let Rebekah stay with us for a few more days, 10 days at least, before she goes away from her home." And Abraham's servant said to them, "Do not stop me. Since God has given me what I came for, I must go back now to my master." And they called Rebekah and asked her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." So the servant of Abraham went away and took with him Rebekah, with good wishes and blessings and prayers from all in her father's house. And after a long journey, they came to the place where Abraham and Isaac were living. And when Isaac saw Rebekah, he loved her, and she became his wife, and they were faithful to each other as long as they both lived. Afterward, Abraham, great and good man that he was, died. He lived 175 years. And Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried Abraham in the cave where Abraham had buried his wife Sarah at Hebron. And then Isaac, who was a peaceful, quiet man, became the owner of all of his father Abraham's riches.
Precious memories, unseen angels, sent from somewhere to my soul.